All right, everyone. We're moving right along here. We started looking at the sensitive information types. We started looking at the train of classifiers, as well as kind of finding the data inside of the tenant. But now let's start kind of taking actions on that. The first one that we're going to be talking about here is data loss protection or data loss prevention. Now, this means several different things to several different people. What I'm referring to data loss prevention or protection is really from a Microsoft 365 perspective. So let's jump right in here. So data loss protection, what is it? Well, what we're looking at here, didn't mean to go that far. What it is a method of stopping specific data types with sensitive information with leaving the organization. So when we're looking at data loss prevention, what we're looking at here is data in motion. So again, I were to send an email to somebody and it contains sensitive information in it. What happens? What can we do with it? Now we're going to actually look at this far more in depth here when we jump into the lab, but just to give you an idea, this one bridges a little bit of a gap. So we have the data in use on top of the data in motion. You know, I have as the user or as the email's flowing through the organization. But what we can also do here is as the user is typing up that email, you know, they're typing that email up and it contains a social security information or a sensitive piece of information in it. We can say, hey, just so you know, before this email gets sent out, it will be encrypted when it gets sent out. Or, hey, you can't send this out at all because it needs to be, it's got sensitive information in it. So all about stopping exfiltration of sensitive data. This really bridges that gap around, yes, potentially looking at malicious actions of everyone trying, someone trying to jump in and get rid of a bunch of data externally. Sure. However, this is really kind of fitting that negligence category there where, hey, I just wanted to send this out to somebody. I have a legitimate use case scenario where I need to send this out to somebody, but it was blocked for some reason. How do I do it? What can I do to resolve it? So on and so forth. That is the big piece here of DLP. Now, looking at it, what services can we protect? This is pretty broad here, and there's actually quite a lot of different locations. So we're going to look at these all individually as we jump into the lab. We're not going to look at each and every single one of them here because it's too long, of course, but we're going to look at these here in several different sections. So emails. This is probably one of the easiest one here inside of Exchange. As I'm sending an email out, I want to be able to put policies on those emails. Again, they contain sensitive information. Maybe I want to encrypt them. Maybe I want to forward it to a group that has to approve it from being sent before it can be actually sent out of the organization. It's a way of stopping leakage of data through email. Email is a very tried and true one. This one has been around for a long time through transport rules, but it's much more verbose now, we'll just say. Files. So we have the ability to protect SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams files. Teams chats are a little bit different. I'll get onto those in a second. I'm really just focusing on the SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams files. Vis-a-vis, it's SharePoint in the back end, but just to let you know that Teams obviously would be covered because we're looking at SharePoint. SharePoint works a little bit different. Exchange works on transport rules. SharePoint works on the SharePoint classifier, the SharePoint indexer. So as data is saved into SharePoint, whether it be OneDrive, through Teams, or wherever, it's stored in SharePoint at the end of the day. And when it's stored inside of there, something happens to it, is that it gets indexed. We're looking for metadata, we're looking for other things, and as it gets indexed, it looks at that document and it says, hey, this has credit card numbers in it, this has social security numbers in it. What do we want to do? We don't want that type of information to share out, so maybe we could stop it. So before a user even opens up the email, to have a little pop-up on it that says, hey, you can't send this out because it's got sensitive data in it. Whatever. And we can do that. That's another service that we can protect. Communications. We have Teams Instant Messaging, chats, and Instant Messaging. So the chat channels, channel messages, Teams Instant Messaging, pretty much any type of messaging and communications inside of Teams, we can protect as well. These work in a little bit different of a manner here, and we will look at this here in the lab. It does take a little bit of effort and time to get situated. I'll demo it for you. I don't think it's necessary for you to see it, to recreate it yourself just because it's difficult and you need an external location potentially, but we'll worry about that in time. Devices. So this is we've looked at everything so far has really been inside of the tenant, inside of Microsoft's ecosystem here. But what about those devices? Okay, what's stopping me from taking data, taking a file from SharePoint on a corporate device, taking it, downloading it, putting it on a USB drive, printing it, saving it to my personal Google or Dropbox or something like that? What's stopping me from doing that? Device DLP. We also have on-premises repositories. So this is an interesting one here. Think about an organization that traditionally has, they don't have a lot of footprint in the cloud, let's just say. They have all of their files and everything exists on file shares and SMB and all of those things on premise. Well, we have the ability with something called the AIP scanner to do and to use DLP. Now, what happens here in this situation is it really just strips away file share permissions, and if it has let's just say it has a credit card number in it, that's what we're looking for. It's going to strip away file share permissions on it because it's sensitive, and it's going to strip those away. Remember, Microsoft's true goal here, and this is what Microsoft wants. Okay, so this is probably the most important part of the section we're talking about here, is Microsoft wants you to put all of your sensitive data inside of Office 365 because we have the most granularity and the most control over that data. We can search for it, we can look for it, we can protect it, we can do different things to it, but if it's inside of the ecosystem, inside of Microsoft 365 ecosystem, we have a lot more control over it than we do on premises. On-prem here, it's a very minimal one, but it does work in certain circumstances, and it's a good bridge gap. Defender for Cloud Apps. What the heck is this? Well, this is what's referred to as a CASB, or a cloud security broker. And Cloud App Security Broker, excuse me. But a CASB, or it used to be referred to as MCAS, Microsoft Cloud App Security. This is a way of being able to protect where data is flowing to potential third parties like Google, Dropbox, and such. And it gives us a lot more variability in terms of what we can do with Defender. Defender for Cloud Apps. Now, we're not really going to talk too much about Defender for Cloud Apps. That actually would be an entire section, an entire course section in its own right, because there are a lot of things that you can do with it. We're not going to talk too much about it here in this particular discussion, unfortunately. But Power BI. We can absolutely use Power BI so people aren't sharing out maybe sensitive dashboards and such with people. It's a way of being able to protect it. Honestly, it's a rather niche thing, but it's there. It's available for us if we need it. So here are the services we can protect. Now again, thinking about it from this perspective here, well, we're covering everything. I mean, with Defender for Cloud Apps, we can cover third-party locations, as well as from the device DLP, we can cover third-party USB drives. And then on-premise repositories, if we have file shares and such we want to protect on-premise, we can do that. If we're using Teams, whether it be through chats, channels, IMs, we're protected there. SharePoint, OneDrive, we're protected there. Exchange, email, we're protected there. My goodness, we're protected almost everywhere, right? Well, yes, there are obviously some niche circumstances that we have to look at, one of which could be like the Power Platform. That's an entity there where they have their own set of, they call it DLP. I don't really call it DLP. I call it more of governance policies there where we can protect connectors. But that's a different topic for a much different day. So let's move on here and talk about what kind of data can we protect with a DLP policy. Well, we can do our standard SITs, or the sensitive information types, so our pattern-based ones. Credit card numbers, social security numbers, the lexicon, if you will, of different things. We can also use sensitivity labels. Now, we haven't talked about these yet. We have a whole section on information protection, which we're going to get to. But we can use sensitivity labels as a condition inside of DLP. We can also use trainable classifiers. Now, we've looked at these as well. Remember, what's an HR document? What's a finance document? Those are different things. And we can look at these trainable classifiers here as well. So we can use these here to cover a pretty good spectrum of data inside our organization. So when we're looking at this here, we can say that if it has a confidential label on it, then we don't want to do X and Y and Z, whatever we want to do with it. If it contains a credit card number and it's an email, it has to be encrypted when it gets sent out. And we have to use Office message encryption to send it out and such. So again, this is the type of data we can protect, which again, we're covering quite a lot of bases here. Finally, the last thing, how can we protect it? Well, unfortunately, well, I guess fortunately here, it is just too difficult to really explain. Really what happens here is it's conditional logic, if then else type statements and such. But it's much easier if we just dive right in. Because there's just far too much to talk about. And to be honest, I'm sure you probably wanted to dive in yourself anyway, because I know I am. Let's jump in over there. Let's start looking and jump into the Compliance Center. And we're going to be creating some DLP policies so we can play around with it and get the experience of what it's like. So with that being said, let's jump over right into the lab there, and I'll see you over there.